Yeah, if you look at the fossil record, that's people that have dug up the ground to look for old bones and remains of organisms. You can classify kind of like different time periods of the Earth's history by digging down deeper into like different layers and stuff. And below a certain point, they can't find fossils anymore. And then above a certain point, they find fossils of all kinds of species all at once. Whereas I think it's called the Cambrian explosion is what they call it in terms of the fossil record. And then if evolution were true, where life somehow started with a single cell and then over millions of years evolved into other species from there, you would see some kind of evidence for that happening even in the fossils, because people might say, oh well, we don't see species changing into other species today because it takes such a long time. But if it ever happened, then there might be a record of it in the fossils, but we don't see that when people go and dig for it. So maybe that's like just the absence of evidence, but yeah, claiming something that has happened that there's no evidence for.
Yeah. So yeah, the fossils are absolutely important to know about because they are a major nail in the coffin of Darwinian evolution. So here's what the fossil record shows. As Jason pointed out, if the Darwinian evolution was true, you would have some things in some layers, very few species, and then you would get more, and they'd be very simple at the bottom levels. Then the next layer would have things a little bit more complex and more of them, and the next layer more complex still and more of them, and you'd have there's this popular tree that was drawn. It's kind of like the Darwinian tree of life, and it started at some basic things. So as Wang Gui pointed out, not only in the fossil record, but now the number of species is getting smaller, not bigger. And Darwinian evolution would be showing this gradual process over a long time. Because the first argument is that people say is, well, we don't see any evidence of this. And so the accusation, or the answer by evolutionists is, well, that's because it takes so long. Well, if it took so long, you would see that in the fossil record still. But what happened is, in this one layer, you suddenly have every single phyla appear. That's in the Cambrian era. Every single phyla that exists suddenly came. It went from nothing, almost nothing, to boom, everything. That doesn't match up to evolution at all. And this is one of the hugest problems. And in fact, I have an interesting observation here, that there was a let me see if I can find the quote in here. Well, I don't see it right now, but basically, back in the 1980s, there was a symposium on it was a paleontologist symposium that was held. Here it is. And the conference was called Macroevolution. It was held at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History. They did a big write-up on it in Newsweek. And in the conference, the paleontologist bravely told the biologist that the fossil record does not and never will support the Darwinian scenario of a smooth, continuous process of life forms, nicely graded from simple to complex. Because Darwin's hope was that, well, yeah, the fossils that he saw didn't bear out this theory, but he was hoping that over the years that the fossil record would fill in. Well, now paleontologists have been working hard at it for over 100 years, trying to find evidence, and they've now given up hope. Okay? Paleontologists no longer, in fact, classical Darwinism is no longer accepted as valid. So what they have is, they're called neo-Darwinists or neo-evolutionists, and they're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? Okay, so if the fossil evidence shows that suddenly everything appeared, how can we explain that? So they said, well, they came up with a new term called something like, let's see, punctiliar, gosh, I just lost the word. Something it's saying for a long time, punctiliar, let me see, they mentioned
Equilibrium?
it. What?
Oh.
What do they call it? There you go. Punctuated equilibrium. So, punctuated equilibrium is the new view. And so what that says is that suddenly things really change, and then they stay the same for a long time. And then they suddenly have these big changes.
Right.
Like, you know, so things were just going along, and suddenly in the Cambrian era there was this punctuated equilibrium, and well, how did that happen? I don't know, and the only explanation that they can go to is, well, there were all these gradual changes, small incremental changes over a long time. It's like, wait a second, but it just happened in a short amount of time. So there is no explanation, but they've given it a name, punctuated equilibrium, and it accurately describes the fact that there is no evidence of evolution in the fossils. So they gave it a fancy name, hoping that people wouldn't notice that this presents a major problem for the theory of evolution. So the evidence does not point, it's like, well, how did they suddenly get there? You don't know. And none of the theories are working. You know, they're kind of like, well, they basically keep going back to this slow, gradual change. It's like, wait a second, but you said it just happened all of a sudden. And so probably the most important thing, the biggest, yes, when we...
So, I have a question. So, I remember we have learned about the ancestors of the humankind.
Yeah.
Like the Australopithecus and some Cro-Magnon and
Yep.
Grand Tower.
Yep.
So, how can you explain this? So, is that some of the different species of the chimpanzee or some other things, or is the really ancestor
Well,
of the microevolution?
yeah, so first of all, it's important to know a couple of things. Some of those examples that they give, they don't have a lot of actual fossil evidence. And they're really extrapolating a lot with the fossil to try to figure out what species it even might be. So, for instance, Java man, they have a skull cap, okay, just the top of a skull, 3 teeth, and a femur. That's it. So, but if you look at the picture of Java man,
Right.
It's all filled in.
it looks like, you know, a person. And so determining what that is it a monkey or a chimpanzee, an ape, or is it a human? First of all, that is a difficult stretch. Even when they have more, here's the way in which they're trying to differentiate species, right? Okay, this looks a lot like a human. But if you go out and even take a look at the various humans that are around today, there is a pretty wide variety. You know, you have some people with really big heads and some people with smaller heads. And the way that they're determining what species it is like how big the head is. And we're not talking like big differences. Like, well, we've already got that much variation just in the people who are alive today. And you can go and look at their DNA and they are 100% human. You know, not part human and part chimpanzee. Okay? So part of the thing is in classification. So one that was really for a long time one of the what they call the icons of evolution. There's this guy, I think Jay Gould wrote a book or somebody called Icons of Evolution. And so Archaeopteryx, have you heard of that? It was supposed to be somewhere between a bird and a reptile. And because it had feathers, they actually had a pretty intact fossil, and they might have even had some with feathers on it. But it kind of had like a reptile-like tail. And so for a long time, this was held as an intermediate form between, you know, birds. You know, if you've seen Jurassic Park, the whole there's this whole belief that let's see, I can't remember which way they went, but these raptors came from or are closely related to birds. A lot of times they show them.
They evolved into birds.
They evolved into birds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where birds came from.